In the last lecture module, we finished reviewing Kim's arguments that Quine's epistemology really isn't an epistemology at all, and in fact it's not even an internally consistent project. Now, we may not find Kim's arguments convincing, but at this point he feels he's established his conclusions, and he wants to turn to a more positive thesis. He starts by considering whether or not his attacks on Quine are attacks on a number of contemporary epistemologists at this time. So he thinks to himself, well, what about those self-proclaimed naturalizers of epistemology? Are they really engaged in the Quinean project? And if they aren't, what are they doing? And his answer comes on 396. The salient characteristic of the naturalized approach is that justification is to be characterized in terms of causal or nomological connections involving beliefs as psychological states of processes, and not in terms of the logical properties of relations pertaining to the contents of those beliefs. This project of characterization is one where theorists provide conditions or criteria for justification in naturalistic terms, as opposed to defining justification using only logical, relational, or evidential terms. Because the naturalistic approach, as Quine defines it, eschews all normative language, this naturalistic approach is not the same as naturalized epistemology. These naturalistic epistemologists differ from their non-naturalistic counterparts in their emphasis on causal and not logical properties when talking about justification. So at this point, Kim feels like he's differentiated these contemporary naturalistic epistemologists from anyone who's practicing or advocating the Quinean project. Now he wants to ask another important question. Is this kind of epistemology, this traditional epistemology, or its naturalistic offshoot, is that project possible? Is it the sort of project that can be brought to fruition? And he wants to give us a reason to suppose that it is. He tells us that if we believe, as we all do, that all normative and valuational properties like justification supervene on naturalistic properties, then we believe that the fact that some belief is justified cannot be a brute fact about it unrelated to the sort of belief that it is. In other words, if Jill forms a belief based on some evidence using some process at some time, and we think, gee, Jill is justified, and Johnny forms a belief using that same process with that same evidence at that same time, we can't look at Jill and say, yes, Jill is justified. But Johnny, who's engaged in the exact same process using the exact same evidence at the exact same time, no, he's not justified. So differences in justification, we think, correspond to differences in facts about the world. And this, Kim thinks, is a commitment to the supervenience of these normative and evaluative properties on naturalistic properties in the world. And he thinks two ideas underlie these convictions. First, values are consistent with facts, so objects indiscernible in facts must also be indiscernible in values. And second, that there must be some non-valuational grounds for that. That is, there have to be some rules. And so if the world is such that there have to be principal distinctions between, for instance, being justified and not being justified, we should be able to discover those principles. And if we can discover those principles, we can use them to articulate our theory of justification.